The water was that impossible shade of turquoise you only see in postcards and travel ads. Sunlight danced across the waves, the air thick with sunscreen, salt, and cheap beer. Kyle stood at the helm of the rented yacht, shirtless, confident, and surrounded by his loyal entourage of childhood friends, Brett, Mason, and Tyler, each louder and more immature than the last. I smiled politely, sipping my sparkling water, pretending to be more relaxed than I was. The open sea stretched around us in every direction, no land in sight, and only the hum of the motor and occasional bursts of laughter breaking the silence. I'd said yes to the trip because Kyle insisted. "It's tradition," he said, "every summer, just the guys. But I want you there this time. That's how serious I am about us." At first, it felt sweet, special even, like he was letting me into something sacred. But the moment we passed the last visible outline of the coast, things shifted. It started with Tyler filming on his phone, narrating like a documentary, introducing Claire, the first outsider to ever board the SS Bromance. Will she survive? Brett offered me a drink I politely declined. Mason joked about initiation. And Kyle? Kyle just watched me with that crooked grin, the one that always felt a few degrees too smug. "Hey, babe," he called from the back deck, motioning me over. "Come here, one last photo for the gram." I hesitated but stepped toward him anyway. I didn't see Mason circle behind me, didn't register Tyler positioning the camera. Then I felt hands on my back, a shove, cold, salt. Silence. I surfaced, sputtering. The boat was already a dozen feet away, their laughter carrying over the waves like gunshots. "Relax!" Brett shouted. "There's a support boat coming. It's part of the prank." Kyle raised his drink in mock salute. "Love you, babe." They were still laughing when they disappeared into the horizon. There was no support boat, just water. Endless, empty, sun-drenched water. I floated, stunned, my brain refusing to accept what was happening. My name is Claire, and I just got dumped, literally, in the middle of the ocean by the man who once swore he'd never let me drown. Now I had to save myself. The initial panic felt like drowning before I even sank. Adrenaline surged, limbs flailing, heart pounding in my ears louder than the waves. But instincts took over. I forced my body into a steady tread, tilted my head toward the horizon, and scanned for anything. Land, boats, buoys, nothing. Just the nauseating rise and fall of the sea. "Stay calm," I told myself. "Breathe. You're a strong swimmer." I'd grown up with lakes, not oceans, but water was water. And right now, it was all I had. I adjusted my rhythm, conserving energy, floating when I could. The sun was brutal, baking the salt into my skin. My legs ached, my throat burned. But I stayed afloat. I replayed the moment on the boat over and over, searching for signs. Kyle had joked before, too hard, too often, like when he accidentally deleted my photos from our trip to Tulum because they were all of you anyway. Or when he'd insisted on reading my DMS just to make sure no one's being inappropriate. He'd laughed when I told him it made me uncomfortable. "You're so sensitive, Claire. Can't take a joke?" Gaslighting in disguise, possessiveness packaged as concern. I'd let it go because he always smiled after, always kissed me like nothing was wrong. But this wasn't a joke. This was calculated. My arms burned as I pushed against the current, shifting with the tide. I thought about how easily he'd tossed me aside, how effortless it had been to turn me into the punchline of his little show. He thought I'd scream. He thought I'd flail. He thought I'd panic so much I'd need rescuing. By him. But I didn't need saving. I needed direction. That's when I saw it. A speck, a silhouette, a boat. Far in the distance, bobbing slowly, small against the endless sea. But there, a fishing trawler maybe. Hope. I angled my body and started swimming toward it. No drama, no tears, just strokes. Measured, determined, defiant. Let them laugh. Let them think I sank. They had no idea who they'd just pushed overboard. The trawler grew larger with every agonizing stroke. By the time the fishermen spotted me, I was too weak to shout, waving a limp arm that barely cleared the surface. One of them, a sun-weathered man with a face carved by years of ocean wind, saw me first. "Overboard!" he yelled, already uncoiling a rope. Within minutes, I was pulled aboard, coughing and half-blind from salt and sun. They wrapped me in a rough, sea-stiffened blanket. One handed me a bottle of water, the cap already loosened. Another was already on the radio. "Got a solo swimmer out in sector B7, female, late 20s, early 30s, severe sun exposure, likely dehydration. We're bringing her in." My lips were too cracked to speak. I just nodded. The boat's cabin smelled like diesel and wet rope, a strange comfort after hours of seawater and betrayal. "You fall off a yacht or something?" one asked gently, offering me shade and another bottle of water. "I was pushed," I whispered. They exchanged glances. By the time we reached the docks, the Coast Guard was waiting. Uniforms, radios, clipboards, questions. So many questions. "What's your name? Were you wearing a life vest? Do you remember the boat's registration number?" I gave them everything I had. Names, times, locations, and one sentence I kept repeating like a prayer. They left me there. But by then, Kyle's version of events was already live. A post on his Instagram, polished and moody. A photo of the open sea captioned, "Sometimes people can't handle the truth. She jumped after an argument. We tried to go back." It had 4,200 likes. His story was slick, self-serving, and just ambiguous enough to cast doubt. A Coast Guard officer held up his phone, frowning. "He says you jumped?" I looked up, face cracked from salt and sun, and smiled without humor. "Of course he does." Back home, the version of me on the internet was unrecognizable. Kyle had spun a narrative so quickly, so cleanly, it was already being shared by his friends and followers before I'd even made it to a real bed. "She's always been dramatic," one of his buddies commented beneath the post. "Total meltdown," another wrote. "We begged her to stay." I scrolled through the comments, each one a carefully placed brick in a wall I hadn't realized they were building. According to them, I had flipped out over something minor, screamed at Kyle, and jumped into the ocean like a psycho. He claimed they'd circled back, tried to find me. "It was scary for everyone," he'd written in one update. "We just wanted her to calm down." There were photos, videos, a grainy clip of me laughing on the boat before it all went wrong. Out of context, I looked happy, willing. He was winning the story before I even got a chance to speak. When I tried to talk to friends, people I thought would rally behind me, their responses were cautious. "Are you sure it wasn't just a prank gone too far?" "Maybe you misunderstood their intention." I mean, Kyle's never seemed like the violent type. Gaslight turned into wildfire, and I started to see it for what it was. This wasn't some impulsive, drunken prank. It was coordinated, crafted, covered. They hadn't just pushed me overboard. They'd erased my side of the story before I could tell it. But what they didn't count on, what Kyle never really understood, was that I'd been documenting things for months. Screenshots, conversations, receipts, quiet preparation born from the uneasy instinct that one day I might need to prove I wasn't crazy. They were writing the narrative, but I was collecting the truth. And eventually, those two things were going to collide. They underestimated me. They always had. That was their first mistake. I spent the next week treating my recovery like reconnaissance. While my skin peeled and my muscles throbbed with every movement, I compiled timelines, compared social media posts with GPS data, cross-checked their claims with the marina's digital records. According to Kyle's story, I'd jumped somewhere around 2 p.m., and they searched for at least 45 minutes before heading back. But the GPS logs from the rental yacht told a different story. They never stopped. No deceleration, no erratic turns, just a steady route that carried them farther from where I was last seen. The fuel receipts were time-stamped, too. They refueled at 3:05 p.m. at a dock 30 miles from where they claimed they'd last seen me. I requested marina security footage. The clerk seemed hesitant until I showed him my bruised shoulders, still blotched from sun exposure and salt. He handed over the hard drive without further questions. One camera caught them laughing as they returned the boat, shirtless and sun-drunk, tossing empty beer cans into a trash bin. There was no urgency, no fear, just high fives and smiles. But the final piece came from an unexpected source, the fishermen. One of them texted me a week after the rescue. "Hey Claire, we found this in the gear bag. Looks like it's yours." Attached was a photo of a GoPro. I hadn't brought one, but Tyler had. He'd been filming everything. The footage was raw and unedited. It showed me laughing nervously, stepping toward Kyle. Then the shove, then chaos. My flailing arms, the boat shrinking in the distance, their laughter growing fainter. Tyler had set the GoPro down, but it kept recording. Even in low resolution, you could hear my voice, small, panicked, calling for help. They never answered. I uploaded a copy to a private cloud, backed it up on a hard drive. Proof. They had crafted a story. But I had captured the truth, and now it was only a matter of time before I used it. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, it was the silence that followed. The texts stopped. The calls grew cold. Friends I'd known for years suddenly responded with cautious neutrality, like I was contagious. Hey, I'm sure there's two sides to every story. I wasn't there, so I can't take sides. You know Kyle, he jokes too far sometimes, but he'd never actually hurt anyone. Even my sister sounded hesitant. Are you sure this isn't just trauma making it worse in your head? I had video, I had timestamps, I had proof. But what I didn't have, yet, was belief. That's the thing about manipulation. It doesn't just distort your sense of reality, it distorts how others see you. Kyle reached out the day after I posted a vague message on Instagram, something about healing in silence. His message was short, calculated. Didn't know the guys would take it that far. I'm sorry. You know I'd never let anything really happen to you. I stared at the screen, rereading his words, the soft faux concern, the implication that it was out of his control, that he'd been a passive bystander. That wasn't what the GoPro showed, and he knew it. I blocked his number, then blocked his backups, email, social, even Venmo. He lost access to me. I wasn't chasing apologies. I wasn't looking for remorse. I was building a case, the kind made of quiet receipts, of inconsistencies and screenshots, every cruel joke he'd made. I now heard with different ears, every patronizing laugh, every eye roll in public. I hadn't just been discarded. I'd been set up, but instead of spiraling, I organized files, footage, statements. He left me floating in the ocean thinking I'd sink, but what he didn't know was that silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The attorney's office was crisp and unassuming. No towering shelves of law books, no mahogany panels, just a woman in her late 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like tempered steel. Her name was Simone Patel. I read the intake report, she said, sliding a folder across the desk. I also watched the footage. You're not overreacting. It was the first time someone said that out loud. I nodded, exhaling slowly. I want to file, I said. Formal complaint, civil or criminal, whatever makes the most sense. She was already scribbling notes. Reckless endangerment. Potential attempted assault depending on jurisdiction. At minimum, we start with a cease and desist for defamation. But Claire, she looked up. This is about more than the law. This is about the court of public opinion. I frowned. You're saying it's about the internet. I'm saying perception can bury the facts. You're right. But if they make you look unhinged, it won't matter. You need airtight documentation. Patterns, planning, everything that proves this was more than a dumb prank. So I did. I went methodical. I built a digital archive. Downloaded every text, every comment, every timestamped transaction. I collected receipts from group dinners where Kyle lied about business meetings, statements from mutual friends who remembered him mocking me at parties. I cataloged the silence, too. The days no one called, the friends who unfollowed me, one by one. Every data point became part of a narrative he hadn't authored. Simone called it a pre-litigation shield. I called it armor. This wasn't about making him pay. It was about making sure he couldn't write me out of the truth. He had the advantage of noise, but I was building a case made of facts. And when it was ready, I wasn't going to shout. I was going to speak clearly, and people were going to listen. I didn't announce it. There was no warning post, no countdown, no cryptic stories. Just one calm, carefully worded caption beneath a single still frame from the GoPro footage. I didn't jump. I was pushed. Here's part of the footage. The rest is with my legal team. I posted it late on a Wednesday night. By morning, it had over 60,000 shares. People paused, rewatched, listened. The comments turned quickly. You can hear them laughing while she's in the water. She didn't even scream. She was in shock. This isn't a prank. This is psychological warfare. Kyle's followers started asking questions. The comments under his boat picture, still captioned with his smug deflection, grew sharp, then furious. Bro, explain this. She nearly died. Is this the truth you were talking about? He deleted 3 posts in 24 hours. Tyler went private. Mason posted a vague quote about cancel culture and misunderstood intentions, only to have a dozen people reply with direct links to the video. The GoPro clip was just 45 seconds long. I didn't need more. It showed the shove, the splash, the laughter, the absence of concern. I didn't rant, I didn't attack, I didn't name call. I simply presented the truth and let the world decide. They did. People I'd never met started stitching together timelines, pulling up old photos, uncovering inconsistencies in Kyle's posts. One Twitter thread went viral comparing the yacht's GPS track with his version of events. The story was out now, and for the first time since they left me drifting in the ocean, the tide was turning. They had underestimated how loud the truth could be, especially when it spoke softly. The first brand dropped Kyle by Friday morning. An outdoor gear company he'd collaborated with for nearly 2 years released a statement. We do not condone behavior that endangers or humiliates others. All partnerships with Kyle M have been terminated effective immediately. By noon, 3 more followed. The fitness brand that had sponsored his Summer Shred campaign wiped his page from their feed. The travel app that had sent him to Mykonos issued a quiet apology and archived every collaboration. Even his podcast, where he and Mason dissected relationships with all the insight of high school boys in a locker room, went dark. He posted a story from what looked like his apartment, shirtless, unshaven, defiant. Just want to remind everyone that real life is more complicated than edited clips. Don't believe everything you see. It backfired. The comments were ruthless. So what are we not seeing? You letting her drown off camera? Bro, stop. You're making it worse. Then the article dropped. An anonymous source quoted in a popular digital magazine, they planned it. It was supposed to be funny. Tyler said they'd pretend to leave her, circle back, and record her panicking, but they didn't circle back. The source didn't name himself, but anyone who knew the group could guess. The piece included screenshots from a group chat, phrases like, "Let's see how long she lasts, LOL." And "She'll freak, but she'll forgive him." They had laughed about it. Ahead of time, I didn't say a word. No interviews, no statements, no follow-up post. I let the story breathe, let people digest what they'd seen. Kyle had built his influence on being loud, charming, unfiltered. Now silence was louder than he'd ever been, and I intended to keep it that way until it was time to speak with purpose. The lawsuit arrived in a cream-colored envelope slid under my door like a polite threat. Defamation, character damage, intentional infliction of emotional distress. It was absurd, predictable, sloppy. Kyle claimed I'd fabricated and edited footage, that my social media maliciously misrepresented his intentions, and that I was exploiting the public's sympathy for attention. His lawyers called me a scorned ex, a manipulator, a woman out for revenge, but Simone had been waiting. She reviewed the complaint with a raised eyebrow. He really wants to litigate this in public? I nodded. Let's give him his audience, then. Within 48 hours, we responded with a counterclaim and a full digital drop, a public timeline mapping every major event, from the trip invitation to the GPS data to the anonymous confession, a statement of facts signed and notarized, screenshots of Kyle's texts to me after the trip, the ones where he didn't know it would go that far, a certified copy of the GoPro metadata, proving no edits, no cuts, just raw, time-stamped footage. Then a short interview, calm, factual, no tears, no anger, just clarity. I sat in a neutral-toned room with a journalist I trusted, someone who'd covered women's safety, not celebrity drama. I didn't post to ruin his life, I said. I posted so I wouldn't keep questioning my own memory, so that when people asked what really happened, I could show them. She asked if I hated him. No, I said, but I needed to protect myself from the story he was trying to tell about me. The interview ran that weekend. It wasn't viral, it wasn't flashy, but it was steady, human, and it shattered the last illusion Kyle had left to hide behind. He tried to weaponize the legal system, but I came prepared. He had influence, I had evidence. The courthouse smelled like old wood and cold air. Everything about it felt too formal, too distant for what was about to unfold. I wore navy, no makeup but enough composure to keep my spine straight. Simone adjusted her glasses beside me, calm as ever, while Kyle sat at the opposing table, jaw clenched, dressed like he was trying to win back a job interview. His lawyers opened with sentiment. My client never intended harm. This was a misunderstanding, an unfortunate attempt at humor that spiraled. They tried to make it sound like a college prank, like I'd overreacted, like the video lacked context. But context was exactly what I had in abundance. The judge sat unmoved as Simone calmly played the footage, pausing to highlight timestamps, to explain how GPS logs disproved their search narrative. She read Kyle's messages aloud, the ones he never thought anyone else would see. Just make her freak a little, she'll forgive you. She's so sensitive. Bet she cries the second we hit the throttle. The room went still. The moment I took the stand, I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. Half pity, half curiosity. I answered every question clearly. Explained the fear, the shock, the silence, and then the work, how I documented, tracked, gathered. Their defense unraveled slowly. Mason contradicted himself within 10 minutes. Tyler claimed to barely remember filming, only to be shown logging into the GoPro cloud account 2 days after the incident. And Kyle, when he took the stand, the bravado cracked. He stammered when pressed, avoided direct answers. He couldn't decide if I was a liar or someone he cared deeply about but didn't know how to handle. The courtroom wasn't a spectacle. It was a slow, deliberate exposure. They had laughed while I sank, but now the only sound was the turning of pages and the clicking of evidence being submitted into the record. And I didn't have to raise my voice once. It came 2 weeks later. The judge read the ruling without theatrics. Reckless endangerment, emotional abuse, defamation, guilty, all 3 of them. Civil penalties were assessed, enough to hit where it hurt. Kyle flinched when the public apology clause was read aloud. They were required to issue formal, signed statements acknowledging their actions, to be published across the same platforms where they'd spun their lies. But the judge paused, looked at me directly. Ms. Everett, would you like to be present when the defendants deliver their apology? I shook my head once. I've already heard everything I need. It wasn't bitterness, it was closure. Let them write whatever their lawyers drafted. let them post some carefully worded statement about regret and growth and lessons learned. It wouldn't matter, because the world had already seen who they were when no one was watching. The fallout was swift. Kyle's former sponsors distanced themselves even further. Podcasts and influencer profiles were scrubbed. Tyler's GoPro account was suspended. Mason's travel blog disappeared. But I didn't celebrate. This wasn't a victory parade. It was the conclusion of a chapter I never asked to be written. Simone handed me the final copy of the ruling in a simple manila envelope. I didn't open it. I already knew what was inside. Truth measured in pages. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment. No champagne, no headlines, just quiet. I'd survived being left in the ocean, and I'd made it through the storm that followed. Justice hadn't come fast or loud, but it had arrived, and it had my name on it. It didn't feel like freedom, not at first. The noise died down slowly, headlines replaced by newer stories, hashtags shifting with the algorithm. Kyle's name became less relevant. Mine faded from the trending pages. And in the quiet, I exhaled. I kept a low profile, but I didn't disappear. Instead, I reached out, not to journalists or platforms, but to people. Survivor networks, advocacy groups, quiet circles where women compared notes on patterns that didn't leave bruises but left scars all the same. They welcomed me without fanfare. No pedestal, just shared understanding. I started volunteering with an organization that offered support to women navigating emotional manipulation and coercive control. At first, I listened. Then I helped. One night, after a closed group panel, a young woman approached me. "He told me I was crazy when I cried," she said. "Said I was being dramatic. I thought it was me, until I saw your interview." I didn't cry, I just reached for her hand. Eventually, speaking engagements followed, small ones, then larger, panels on digital abuse, gaslighting, social sabotage. I never shared every detail, just enough to show what could hide behind couple goals photos and curated smiles. A keynote invitation came in the spring, National Women's Safety Conference. I wore navy again, spoke calmly, clearly. Abuse doesn't always come with bruises. Sometimes it sounds like a joke. Sometimes it comes with a hashtag. But if it makes you question your reality, your worth, or your safety, it matters. The room stood when I finished. I didn't smile out of pride. I smiled because I finally felt seen. And that was something no verdict could ever give me. It started as a shared document, a simple checklist for women in toxic relationships, how to track patterns, store screenshots safely, document inconsistencies without raising suspicion. Then it grew. I built a site, launched a resource hub, invited experts, attorneys, trauma counselors, digital security specialists. Proof before panic became the tagline. A quiet lifeline for anyone walking the same fine line I once had between suspicion and survival. I gave workshops on recognizing red flags, explained how a joke can be a warning, how a pattern of overreacting is often a response to repeated emotional wounds. It wasn't about revenge, it was about recognition. Eventually, a publisher approached me. They'd followed the trial, watched the fallout, asked if I'd consider writing about it. The book took a year, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to say it right. I titled it Treading Water. It wasn't a tell-all, it was a survival guide, a memoir braided with practical tools. How to collect evidence, how to protect yourself online, how to tell the difference between doubt and instinct. When it hit the bestseller list, Kyle's name was never mentioned once in the press. Mine was, for the first time on my terms, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a voice, and more importantly, as a mirror held up for others who'd been told their pain was an overreaction. Treading Water wasn't about how I sank, it was about how I learned to swim smarter. The marina was smaller than the one from a year ago, No yachts lined up like trophies, no influencers snapping sunset selfies on rented decks. Just a few modest boats bobbing gently under a pale sky. I'd booked a private charter. Not for luxury, not for show, just for space, still water, perspective. The captain was a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and a quiet strength I recognized instantly. "First time back on open water?" she asked as we untied from the dock. "First time I've chosen it," I said. She nodded like she understood. The boat cut through the waves slowly, the engine humming beneath us. I stood near the bow, arms resting on the rail, the wind lifting strands of hair across my face. The sea stretched ahead, vast, powerful, unconcerned with memory. A year ago, this view would have made me tremble. Now it made me breathe. I thought about the girl I was, flailing in panic, salt water in her throat and betrayal stinging harder than the sun. I remembered the silence that followed, the doubt, the disbelief, and then the shift. Not a dramatic reinvention, just one choice at a time, one documented truth, one refused apology, one quiet, powerful no. Now I looked out at the same horizon, and it no longer frightened me. It reminded me of how far I'd come. The captain offered to drop anchor so I could sit with the view. I declined. I'd rather keep moving. As the boat carried me farther out, I pulled out my journal. Not to write, just to read one line I'd scribbled weeks ago and underlined twice. "You thought you'd drown me. You only taught me how to swim farther." I closed the journal, smiled, and let the waves carry me forward. Because closure isn't something you're handed. It's something you sail toward on your own terms, with your hands on the wheel. And this time, no one was going to push me overboard.